In a quiet village surrounded by dense forests, life was simple and peaceful. Farmers tended their crops, children played near the river, and nights were calm. But one fateful winter evening, everything changed. It began with a howl, long, deep, and unlike any wolf they had ever heard. The sound pierced through the icy night air, sending chills down everyone's spines. Elder Joseph, the oldest man in the village, sat by his fire and muttered under his breath, "The shadow wolf has returned." Few paid attention to his warning. For years, he had told stories about a creature that roamed the woods, a wolf larger and smarter than any other, said to be cursed by the spirits of the forest. But the villagers laughed it off, calling it nothing more than an old man's tale. That night, their laughter turned to screams. On the edge of the village, a farmer's family was woken by strange scratching at their door. The father, lantern in hand, stepped outside to check. The cold air bit at his skin, and the forest seemed darker than usual. Suddenly, glowing yellow eyes appeared in the shadows. Before he could shout, the beast leapt from the darkness. His cries were loud but short, fading into silence. When the villagers arrived at dawn, they found only blood-stained snow and deep claw marks leading back into the woods. Fear spread like wildfire. By evening, the villagers held a meeting. Some thought it was a bear or a pack of wolves. Others whispered about the shadow wolf. Elder Joseph stood among them and said, "This is no ordinary beast. It hunts not for food, but for vengeance. And it won't stop." Many dismissed him again, calling him superstitious. But as night fell, every door was locked, and every fire burned brighter. Still, fear lingered in their hearts. At midnight, another attack shook the village. The blacksmith's shop was destroyed, its walls covered in deep claw marks. Tools were scattered, and on the wooden floor, a single word was scratched, "run." No one knew how an animal could write, but they all understood one thing: the shadow wolf wasn't just a beast. It was something far more dangerous, something that wanted them to suffer. The village was no longer the same. Fear hung in the air like a thick fog, and even the bravest men felt helpless. After the attack on the blacksmith's shop, the villagers gathered once again, this time with desperation in their eyes. "We can't just wait for it to kill us all," one of the younger men, Aaron, said, his voice trembling but firm. "We need to hunt it before it hunts us." Elder Joseph shook his head gravely. "You cannot hunt what you do not understand. The shadow wolf isn't an ordinary creature. It's a spirit of vengeance, and its wrath is unstoppable." But Aaron and a group of determined villagers refused to listen. Armed with torches, spears, and bows, they ventured into the forest under the pale light of the moon. The woods were eerily silent, and every crunch of snow beneath their boots sounded deafening. They followed the trail of claw marks and blood deeper into the forest, the shadows growing darker with every step. Suddenly, the wind picked up, howling through the trees like a ghostly warning. "Stay alert," Aaron whispered, gripping his spear tightly. An hour passed, and the group began to doubt their plan. The forest seemed endless, and the creature was nowhere to be seen. Just as they considered turning back, a low growl echoed around them. The men froze. The sound wasn't coming from one direction, it was everywhere. Panic set in as they realized they were being watched. Glowing yellow eyes appeared in the darkness, one pair, then another, and then more. "It's not alone," one man whispered, his voice shaking. Before anyone could react, a massive shadow leapt from the trees, knocking one of the hunters to the ground. The others attacked, their spears stabbing at the air, but the creature was too fast. It moved like smoke, striking and disappearing before anyone could land a blow. Screams filled the forest as one by one, the hunters fell. Only Aaron managed to escape, running blindly through the trees until he stumbled back into the village, his face pale and his body trembling. "It's not just a wolf," he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "It's a monster, and it's coming for all of us." Aaron's return to the village sparked chaos. His pale face and trembling hands told a story even before he could speak. "We can't fight it," he gasped. "It's not alone, and it's not just a wolf. It's something else, something far worse." The villagers gathered around him, their fear now mixed with confusion. "What do you mean, it's not a wolf?" one of the elders asked. Aaron shook his head, his voice breaking. It's like a shadow. It moves faster than the wind, disappears before you can even strike. And there were more of them, watching us. Panic swept through the crowd. Mothers held their children close, and men gripped their weapons, though they doubted they could protect anyone. Elder Joseph stood in the center, his face grim. "You didn't listen," he said, his voice heavy. "I warned you. The shadow wolf is no ordinary beast. It's a curse born from our ancestors' sins." The villagers fell silent, their eyes fixed on him. Joseph continued, "Long ago, when this village was founded, the forest was sacred land. The first settlers hunted its wolves for sport, killing them without reason, until only one was left. That wolf was different, larger, stronger, and intelligent. When they killed it, its blood stained the earth, and its spirit swore vengeance. It cursed this village, vowing to return with every generation to punish us. Why didn't you tell us sooner?" A woman cried. "I tried," Joseph replied, his voice shaking. "But none of you believed me. Now, the curse is here again." The villagers looked at one another, their fear turning into desperation. "There has to be a way to stop it," Aaron said, his voice rising. "There must be something we can do." Joseph hesitated before speaking. "There is a way. The wolf's spirit is tied to the land it was killed on, a place deep in the forest. If we find it and perform the ancient cleansing ritual, we might end the curse." "But the forest is their territory," Aaron said. "How can we even reach it?" Joseph looked at him with steady eyes. "With courage, and sacrifice. This is not just a hunt. This is a battle for survival. If we fail, the shadow wolf will destroy everything." As the villagers prepared for the dangerous journey, the air grew colder, and the forest seemed to grow darker. Time was running out. The villagers gathered at dawn, their faces pale but determined. Aaron, Elder Joseph, and a small group of brave souls prepared to enter the cursed forest. Each carried weapons, lanterns, and a pouch of sacred herbs Joseph claimed could ward off evil. The rest of the villagers stayed behind, watching with fearful eyes. "This forest is no longer ours," Joseph said as they stood at the edge of the towering trees. "Once we cross this line, we're in their world. Stay together, no matter what you see or hear." The group nodded, stepping into the forest, where the air felt colder, heavier. The trees loomed over them like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting into unnatural shapes. It wasn't long before they felt eyes watching them. The journey was slow, each step filled with dread. Aaron led the group, holding his spear tightly, while Joseph whispered prayers under his breath. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker, even though it was still daylight. Strange sounds echoed around them, twigs snapping, distant growls, and the faint sound of something breathing. "Do you hear that?" one of the men whispered, his voice barely audible. Aaron nodded. "It's close. Stay alert." Suddenly, a shadow darted between the trees, too fast to follow. The group froze, their weapons raised, but nothing came. Then, another shadow moved, and another. They were surrounded. "They're toying with us," Joseph said grimly. "They want us to lose hope." One of the men panicked and broke away from the group, running into the darkness despite their shouts to stop. A piercing scream followed, and then silence. "Keep moving," Joseph urged, though fear was etched on his face. "We're close to the sacred ground." The group pressed on, their hearts pounding. Finally, they reached a clearing. In the center stood an ancient, crumbling stone altar, covered in moss and claw marks. "This is it," Joseph said. "The place where the curse began." But before they could begin the ritual, the air grew icy, and the shadows around them came alive. Glowing yellow eyes appeared one by one, circling them. The shadow wolf stepped forward, massive, with fur as dark as night and teeth that gleamed like blades. "You've come to end the curse," it growled, its voice deep and unnatural. "But only blood will decide your fate." The clearing fell silent as the shadow wolf stepped into the dim light of the moon. Its massive frame towered over the villagers, its yellow eyes glowing with rage. Around it, smaller shadowy wolves emerged, their growls low and menacing. The villagers clutched their weapons tightly, knowing they were outnumbered. "This is where it ends," Elder Joseph said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Begin the ritual." Aaron and another villager, Clara, hurried to the ancient altar. Joseph handed them the sacred herbs and a dagger carved from bone. "Light the herbs and recite the words I taught you." No matter what happens, don't stop. As Clara lit the herbs, smoke began to rise, filling the air with an earthy, sharp scent. Aaron held the dagger, his hands trembling. The ancient words Joseph had taught them echoed in his mind, but before he could begin, the shadow wolf let out a deafening howl. The smaller wolves charged. "Defend them," Joseph shouted, stepping forward with his staff. The remaining villagers fought bravely, their weapons clashing against the shadowy beasts. Each wolf moved unnaturally fast, their forms fading in and out like mist. Every blow landed felt like a small victory, but the wolves kept coming. Aaron stood over the altar, gripping the dagger as Clara chanted the sacred words. The smoke thickened, and the shadow wolf snarled, its movements agitated. It lunged toward them, but Joseph intercepted, striking it with his staff. The wolf roared in anger, swiping at him with its massive claws. "Keep going," Joseph shouted, blood dripping from his side. Aaron raised the dagger, his voice shaky as he joined Clara in the chant. The words seemed to vibrate in the air, and the forest itself began to tremble. The shadow wolf growled, its form flickering as if the ritual was weakening it. "You think you can end this?" The wolf snarled, its voice deep and echoing. "This land is mine. Your blood will only feed my rage." With a final scream, the shadow wolf charged at Aaron. In a moment of desperation, Aaron plunged the dagger into the altar, shouting the final words of the ritual. A blinding light erupted from the stone, engulfing the wolf and its shadowy pack. When the light faded, the wolves were gone, and the forest was silent. Aaron and the villagers stood in the clearing, battered but alive. The curse was broken, but at a heavy cost. The shadow wolf was no more, but its legend would live on forever.